Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining KUOW today for our final Inside 2020 event of the year. I'm Karen Mathis, President and General Manager of KUOW. The Inside 2020 series was created to offer an insider's look into the work of KUOW and NPR journalists during the election year. From the primaries and the debates to the general election and now the unconventional presidential transition, KUOW and NPR have been your home for fact-based reporting. We will continue to empower you with knowledge, trusted reporting, and a multitude of perspectives. Our job is to bring you the truth and to work in service of your right to know. Today, we have two journalists who are working to bring you the facts and broaden your perspectives every day. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent for NPR, and KUOW's news director, Jill Jackson. Mara Liasson is an award-winning journalist whose reports can be heard regularly on Morning Edition and All Things Considered. She covers politics and policy from Washington, D.C., focusing on the White House and Congress, and also reports on political trends beyond the Beltway. Jill Jackson is an Emmy Award-winning journalist who runs KUOW's news coverage. She has been a reporter covering politics and the U.S. Congress in Washington, D.C., and led CBS This Morning's Washington newsroom and produced for the Face the Nation team. We are thrilled to welcome both of these extraordinary journalists for a conversation on the 2020 election and what comes next. Before we begin, we would like to give a big thank you to our Inside 2020 series sponsor, PEMCO Insurance. Thank you so much for your support. And thank you all for joining us here today virtually. We hope you enjoy the discussion. You'll have a chance to weigh in with your own questions. And now I'm turning it over to Jill Jackson.
Mara Liasson, we are so happy to have you here today. We appreciate you taking the time, especially during this incredibly demanding news cycle and moment in history. For our virtual audience today, welcome to you. We would love to hear from you during this conversation. Please share your questions with us in the comments box or section, and I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in and include them in our discussion throughout the hour. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can.
Except there have been a lot of surprises, except what isn't surprising is that a president who never broke 50% approval ratings or favorability ratings and who got 46.1% of the vote last time didn't win. I mean, incumbents with those ratings don't win usually. 46% of the vote, which is what Trump got in 2016, that's what John McCain got when he lost. So usually if a Republican gets 46% of the vote, they lose. Donald Trump got about 47% this time. So that's normal. I'm trying to think of anything else that's normal. That's normal. Okay, what else about this election? Amazing, tremendous turnout, like record-breaking turnout. No big disruptions from what we know, no foreign cyber attacks, no disruptions at the polls. The president and his legal team are hard at work hunting for irregularities and fraud, which they say are rampant, but they haven't come up with any. So that's good. Then there's plenty of things that are bad. I mean, I don't think it's good for the country when the president of the United States says the election is fraudulent. I understand why he's doing it. I do not believe he will remain in office. I do believe he'll leave, but for him to maintain his brand, which is about never, ever, ever losing, and maintain his grip on the Republican Party and keep his ardent base of supporters with him for whatever he wants to do next, run again in 2024, start a digital news organization to compete with Fox, whatever it may be, maintain, do everything, anything that any other president who has been defeated would do, or president who finished their term would do, which is go gracefully off the stage and let their successor have a clean shot. He's not going to do that. So that's totally different. really different. Obviously, the pandemic curtailed door knocking, which Democrats are now regretting because they're the ones that decided to follow the public health advice and not do door knocking. Republicans continued to do that. Donald Trump continued to hold huge rallies. When we sift through the rubble, so to speak, and both parties are looking for lessons, it's very hard to figure out what the voters were saying. They decisively defeated the president. Joe Biden is on his way, not just to getting the most votes that any candidate has gotten, because Donald Trump also got the most votes that any defeated candidate has gotten because we had such a big turnout. But Joe Biden is on his way to getting a bigger margin of victory than anyone since FDR. Ronald Reagan got 50.7% of the vote. Joe Biden so far has 50.8, and we're not finished counting. So as both parties kind of sift through this, okay, Joe Biden won a decisive victory. He didn't just get the blue wall back, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. He flipped 2 red states, Arizona and Georgia, but Democrats lost seats in the House. They didn't get the Senate back. I say that the headlines on this election, the first headline for Democrats is, gee, I didn't know winning was so depressing. And the headline for Republicans is, I didn't know losing felt so great. So Republicans are absolutely triumphant, emboldened. They are absolutely sure they're getting the House back in 2022. Mm-hmm. Okay, Democrats have no way to get any legislation passed. You know, if Mitch McConnell doesn't want it, it's not going to happen. Now, there is a lot that President-elect Biden can do with executive orders, with the bully pulpit. There's a lot that presidents can do. But when I talk to Democrats now, it's like I'm talking to them after a president has just lost his first midterm and lost Congress. That's what it feels like. So he didn't get the 2 years that every Democrat since Grover Cleveland has gotten. In other words, Biden is the first, assuming the Senate stays Republican, assuming the 2 Georgia seats don't flip, we don't know yet, but we'll know on January 5th. Assuming that, Joe Biden is the first Democrat since Grover Cleveland to come into office without control of Congress, without having his
a mandate.
Well, if that's what you want to call a mandate. Mandates are very illusory and ephemeral, and they're a figment of the president's imagination sometimes, but he doesn't have much of a mandate. But Donald Trump won Florida decisively by 3 points at the same time that Florida voters were passing by 62% a referendum to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour in Florida. So, you know, if you're somebody, I feel like if you're a Republican or a Democrat and know exactly what the voters were trying to tell us, I don't believe you, because I think the biggest takeaway for all of us, journalists, operatives, et cetera, is humility. We called it wrong. We didn't think that this was going to be the result. We were right on the presidential level, but so it's really hard to figure out exactly what this election means, except for I can tell you that the winning side is very depressed and the losing side is very happy.
Isn't that interesting? You know, it's so interesting. I am hearing really similar things from people who I still talk to in Washington, D.C. But, you know, here in Washington State, in the Seattle area, Seattle, only 8% of voters in Seattle went for Trump. It's a very blue area.
Yes.
And people are still feeling, there was so much anxiety leading up to that election, and we haven't had the sort of release. And I keep hearing from people that they're just so worried about this transition and the president's refusal to concede. And so how alarmed should people really be? I mean, some Republicans are warning not getting your daily intelligence briefing is dangerous. So there could be all kinds of consequences.
There's lots of consequences, but I believe the president will leave office. I don't think that's why he's doing this. Of course, he'd like to get the courts to say he's really the winner. But I think that's going to be very, very difficult. You'd have to overturn tens of thousands of votes in many, many states. Remember 2000, which the Trump team keeps on saying this is analogous to 2000. 2000 was one state won by 537 votes. So really different. I don't think that's why he's doing this. First of all, what he's doing is bad for democracy because he's saying this election was illegitimate. And he never committed himself to the peaceful transfer of power, and he hasn't yet. I do believe in the end he will. But Right now, what he's doing, as I said, he has to maintain the, some people could call it a conspiracy theory, but he has to maintain this illusion that he's the real winner, that he didn't lose, that it was stolen from him, so that he can continue to be, a major figure. Now, he, without doing anything, would still be the most important Republican on the planet and will be as long as he is alive. He has a vice-like grip on the base of the party. No one is going to get the nomination of the Republican Party without his blessing. He himself might run again in 2024, or at least say that he will, or not close the door to doing so for the next 4 years. We don't know what it's like to have an ex-president weighing in, as we expect him to do on Twitter from Mar-a-Lago. He's already started a leadership PAC so he can raise money to support himself. In other words, if you have a leadership PAC, you can spend it on your own expenses, travel and office and whatever else he wants to do. That's something totally unprecedented that he's going to be out there. In terms of the anxiety about the transition, it's unclear exactly what Donald Trump can do during this transition as president that couldn't be undone. Now, he can put a lot of political appointees, switch them to civil service so that they have some protections. They're harder to fire. He's decapitated the entire Defense Department. Some people are saying, is that a coup or a cover-up? I don't think, I think it's more of a cover-up. Maybe he wants the intelligence about his connections with Russia to be buried. We don't really know what his motivation is. Could be just petty vengeance. He didn't like those people. Mark Esper, even though he had this nickname as Mark Jesper, pushed back against a lot of the things Trump wanted to do. So, but in terms of people worried about this transition, Joe Biden says it's not going to impede his work staffing up. Don't forget, he has, as Trump reminded us almost daily, Biden has 47 years of experience in Washington, and so do the people around him. So, but yes, it's not good for continuity to have the president-elect not get intelligence briefings, but it sounds like there are now a small but growing number of Republicans who, even though they're not willing to say that Biden actually won, they are willing to say that he should get intelligence briefings. So I think that will happen. I think that the biggest source of anxiety is just what this does to our democracy and our faith in the system. The fact is the system worked. We pulled off an election in a pandemic. And, there is one poll, it's only one poll. I don't want to make it, give it more importance than it deserves. Morning Consult did a poll that showed that after the day after the election, 70% of Republicans thought the election was free and fair. Now that Trump has been tweeting every single day about how it isn't, now only 35% of Republicans think it is. That's not good for stability, So that's what I'd say to your friends who are worried.
Yeah. Our representative, Pramila Jayapal, she is the head of the Progressive Caucus in the House. She told our host, Bill Radke, recently that unity for unity's sake is not important, kind of responding to Biden's message about compromise and unity. And it's opened the door to maybe there could be compromise on something like infrastructure, but on immigration or healthcare, there are certain things that are just rights and that are worth fighting for and that are not worth there's no compromise there. And I just have a feeling listening to that progressives are going to be very disappointed over the next.
Well, I have no idea what she means.
Yeah.
When she says no compromise, meaning what?
Healthcare is a basic human right.
Yes. Nobody's saying it's not. You're going to get a public option through the Senate.
Right.
What does that mean? I don't know. What one of my colleagues, Juana Summers, is working on a piece about young voters who would be people who agree with Jayapal, we would assume, on policy. And she's finding that they are remarkably clear-eyed about what can and can't be done. That, no, Joe Biden cannot wave a magic wand because Democrats didn't win the Senate and they lost seats in the House. And now Nancy Pelosi is going to have the smallest margin, I think, since it's been decades and decades. This is a very, very small margin in the House. That's why Republicans are so, confident that they're going to get the House back in the first midterm. So in terms of progressives, what is it that progressives think can be done? I mean, Joe Biden has an extremely progressive agenda, and it's very ambitious, and it's full of big plans, but it all depends on having the Senate and having a durable functioning majority in the House, which we'll see if they do. So I don't really know what she means. There is a big debate inside the Democratic Party right now about whether things like defund the police hurt Democrats. I can tell you that every single person I've talked to, Democrat and Republican, says yes, it did. And don't forget, as soon as it became a slogan, you had even the people who believed in it saying that's not really what we mean. So it was confusing at best. The riots didn't help Democrats. The peaceful protests helped Democrats. The big Black Lives Matter marches helped Democrats, but the riots did not. So there are big debates about people who win election in very blue districts and people who are on the front lines who made the House majority who have to win over voters in red districts. And, this hopefully would be resolved. What I'm surprised about, the Democrats have been remarkably unified. Obviously, they were unified in their desire to get rid of Trump. I'm waiting to see Connor Lamb and AOC appear together around the country. Two young, appealing, dynamic Democrats, one who won in a very red district in Pennsylvania, and the other one, AOC, who comes from an 85% Democratic district in New York. They believe in the same things, a lot of the same things, but, they go about them in different ways. So this is an internal debate, and the Democrats had it right off the bat, right in public, the day after the election, but that'll continue.
Yeah. I want to take one of our first questions. Bruce asks, going forward, how much time and effort will NPR give to Trump? And
that is an excellent question. Okay, we're starting to think about that. First of all, like I said, we've never had a president who didn't just go quietly into the night. Okay, kind of like that song, how can I miss you when you won't go away? So let's assume that Trump continues to tweet. He's not going to get involved in the intricacies of policy and weigh in on legislation, but maybe he'll make more trouble for the Republican Party than he does for Joe Biden. We don't know. We don't know what he's going to do. We assume he won't go quietly because his metric for success is dominating the media narrative and being omnipresent. Now, it's up to the media to either allow him to do that or not. When he's the president of the United States, we have to cover him. So I would say that this question is being considered in newsrooms all over the country right now. It'll depend on what he does. And then we have to decide if it's news. Don't forget, towards the end of his term, even Fox News was cutting away from the live rallies, So it depends. If it's just tweets, if he is freezing the Republican nominating battle for 2024, that's a news story. I would cover that. If you're Mike Pence or Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or Nikki Haley, how can you go out and raise money if Donald Trump says he might want to run again? He's not going to like that. So that's, to me, a really interesting dynamic. That's a news story. I'll cover that. In terms of would we cover Trump as if he's still the president or still a major figure who gets to weigh in on everything? Probably not. Now, he doesn't need us to do that. He never has. He can start his own media company. He's rumored to want to start a digital service that competes with Fox's. I think I'm on Fox. I'm a contributor. I should tell you that.
Yeah.
But I think it's called Fox Nation. I think that's the name of the streaming service. Anyway, he wants to compete with that. So we'll have to see.
Yeah. How do you think, just following up on that and a little bit of a look back, how do you feel the media has done? How do you think the media has done covering this very
the media is not one monolithic thing. The media is not one monolithic thing. I think the media covered this election really well. I think mainstream media organizations, public radio is one of them, covered it fairly and covered it in every way, shape, and form as we could think of. And the media had to adjust to Trump. We've never had a president who told so many falsehoods on a daily basis. I think that was a gradual process, but we fact check him as he says it. In other words, we're like fact checking live. We're not letting him say it and then putting a separate fact check story like we used to do in the old days. Social media companies are doing the same thing, and I think that we did a good job. Look, every democratic institution, including the press, was undergoing a stress test with Donald Trump. He was a stress test on democratic institutions, and some of them came through with flying colors. I would say the voters of the United States came through with flying colors. Huge engagement from, huge turnout, peaceful turnout, all of that. So that was great. I think the press has tried to do its job, even though we were called enemy of the people. You went to Trump rallies and you saw the T-shirt, rope, tree, journalist, some assembly required. I mean, that's tough. But I think we've tried to do our job.
We have another question that was submitted in advance. Someone is very interested in your views and insights into the Georgia runoffs.
Okay, the Georgia runoffs. So for those of you, since you live in Washington State and don't have to know about this, there's 2 Senate races in Georgia. The reason why there's 2 is because the Republican incumbent, Johnny Isakson, retired for health reasons. So he has 2 years left on his term. So one of the elections is a special election. That's the Kelly Loeffler versus Raphael Warnock race. Whoever wins that race has to turn around and run again in 2 years. Okay, it's a special election. In Georgia, if you don't get over 50%, you have to go to a runoff, and neither race, the Loeffler-Warnock race, and then the other one, which is David Perdue, who's an incumbent Republican senator, John Ossoff is his Democratic challenger, neither of them got to 50% either. So we have 2 runoffs. We're also having a hand recount in the presidential election in Georgia. That's a completely separate thing. So I would say that, pollsters are now in the doghouse. Nobody should listen to them anymore, but everybody I talk to thinks that the Republicans have the advantage in Georgia. Yes, Biden is leading in the presidential count there, but this is going to be a really interesting test. Can a Black man win in Georgia? Can a Democrat win a runoff? A Democrat hasn't won a runoff for a statewide office in Georgia, I don't think, since like 1992 or something. So Georgia is a state that's turning purple. Joe Biden looks like he's winning it, not by a humongous margin, but I don't know what's he up tonight, 14,000 votes, something like that. Somebody could check that. And in the past, the formula has been for Democrats in the South, if they want to win statewide, African Americans have to be 30% of the electorate, and then they have to get 30% of the white vote. So 30-30 was the formula. I'm being told now by people in Georgia that that's an outmoded formula because there's so many new minorities living in Georgia, Asians and South Asians and Hispanics, that you don't need 30% of the electorate to be Black. I mean, but you'll need huge turnout in the metro Atlanta area for Democrats to win. That's going to be hard. Now, every Republican who wants to run in 2024 is going to be in Georgia. I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump goes to Georgia. I don't know. We have not seen or heard from him in 10 days. That has to be a record. Mm-hmm. And of course, Stacey Abrams, who was the minority leader of the Georgia legislature, and she runs something called Fair Fight, and she's been working on registering low propensity voters, mostly African-American, for years. I don't think there would be a runoff today if it wasn't for Stacey Abrams. So, a lot of work has been done. I think that these are going to be hard-fought races. I guess I'd give the Republicans an edge, but who knows? Now, if the Democrats win both of them, then the Senate will be 50-50, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris, would break ties. So that would be a Democratic majority, but by the slimmest of margins. If the Republicans get both of them, they'll have then it'll be 52-48. Yeah. Slim, very slim. No matter what's going to happen, it's going to be very slim. I think that Barack Obama might go down there. That is certainly what the Democrats want. And it'll be really interesting. The one thing about Georgia that I just want to point out, North Carolina, which has been considered a battleground state, Georgia was not considered a battleground state. North Carolina, Arizona, Florida, and the 3 blue wall states were the 6 top tier states. Georgia was something that people was not on everyone's radar screen. It was considered to be an expansion state for Democrats. Georgia was kind of a sleeper. North Carolina had already been a battleground. Barack Obama had won it once, but Georgia was kind of ignored. And Georgia was a state that was changing demographically. And, It's pretty
everyone was
amazing.
paying attention to Texas, but
Yes,
not
everyone
Georgia.
was paying. Well, Texas was so, the holy grail for Democrats, or the thing that they always
Generates
believed would come
excitement.
their way. Yeah, eventually.
Mhm.
But anyway, so Georgia, and the other thing about Georgia is it's relatively, it's a place where you can run elections efficiently because it's like one big media market.
Interesting.
Atlanta, yeah.
Stephanie asks, and just a reminder to everyone watching, please submit your questions. We still have lots of time to get them in. So ask away. Stephanie asks, are there any areas where the two parties can come together? What might create?
Yeah. Theoretically, there are several areas. Theoretically. I mean, this all depends on what does Mitch McConnell see in his political interest. Not letting Joe Biden pass anything? I don't know. Okay, so the areas where there could be some overlap, bipartisan consensus, infrastructure. Everyone wants infrastructure. How green would it be? We don't know. Everybody says there has to be some kind of pandemic relief bill, but how big? Even Republicans say now they want to do something about climate change. Mostly it's planting trees. I don't see the Biden kind of green agenda getting any traction. I would say infrastructure, the minimum wage. I think I mentioned this at the same time that Florida voters were giving Donald Trump a 3-point win in Florida. They also were passing by 62% a hike in the minimum wage in Florida to $15 an hour. So Joe Biden wants to raise the federal minimum wage to 15. Maybe that could happen. Taxes, he was going to pay for a lot of his initiatives by rolling back some of the Trump tax cuts on corporations and high income individuals. He said everybody over $400,000 he would raise taxes on, but nobody underneath. That's not going to happen. I would say infrastructure is the big one. Now, on immigration, I think that when Republicans get finished celebrating how wonderful it is to lose the White House but gain seats in Congress, or at least not lose them too many of them in the Senate, they will say, hey, we just lost Arizona. And they know that in the long term, they have a demographic problem. Yes, they hung on in the Rio Grande Valley. Biden didn't win those counties by very much, but it's possible that Republicans will see it in their interest to legalize the Dreamers. I mean, it's possible. I think it would be in everybody's political interest to get this issue off the table. Legalize the Dreamers. There has been a compromise immigration bill passed in the past. It would have to have some kind of guest worker initiative in it, and then a path to citizenship, an extremely long one for the 11 million people who are here, who are undocumented, but who otherwise meet certain criteria. I mean, I think that's a long shot, but theoretically there would be bipartisan agreement there, because there has been in the past.
Immigration, which I think is one of the things that really sparked Donald Trump's following stance on immigration. And when I went to Washington D.C. and started covering Congress, it was 2004, and everyone was talking about the Dreamers and how it was something we all agree on, and it's what we're going to.
That was 16 years ago. That's when Dick Durbin first introduced the Dream Act. 16 years ago.
16 years ago, and they always said that was the thing that was the thing that would help get comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, or just pass on its own. The Dreamers are extremely popular. Donald Trump kept on saying he wanted to legalize the Dreamers. But this is, one thing that happened during the Trump years is that immigration got more popular. The more he attacked immigrants, the more polls showed that larger and larger numbers of Americans said that immigration was an important thing for the country and a positive thing for the country. So this is really interesting. What are the lessons that Republicans took away from this election when they picked up House seats? Meaning it's good to follow Trump's immigration agenda. He didn't talk about immigration very much during this campaign. Or were they just lucky that Democrats decided to talk about defunding the police, and there were a bunch of riots, including in Seattle, that they could use to craft a whole law and order agenda that really hurt Democrats in a lot of these swing districts. So it depends on the lessons that they learn. But those are just some of the few areas where there might be bipartisan compromise.
Do you have any predictions on if President Trump does leave, as you predict.
Yeah.
And do you have any predictions on whether McConnell will change his tune a little bit at that moment? I mean, he and Biden have worked successfully together.
Yes,
so
he and
many
Biden
times.
have worked together. I get that.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
Mitch, first of all, Mitch McConnell said famously that his goal in the Obama administration was to make sure that Obama was a one-term president. I am sure that's his goal now.
Yeah.
The only reason that he would compromise with Joe Biden on anything is if he sees it in his political interest to do so.
Mm-hmm.
What's in his political interest? He has achieved one of his lifetime goals. He's stacked the judiciary with conservatives. That's not going to change for a generation. No, I can't imagine him confirming a single judge that Joe Biden would put forward. Now, he'll let him have a couple of district judges in Illinois, but if, heaven forbid, one of the Supreme Court justices should die, that seat will be empty. I can't imagine a Supreme Court confirmation hearing occurring in divided government anymore. I mean, I think that those days are over. So the court will be packed. Now, you can pack a court by expanding it, or you can pack a court by shrinking the number. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what is in Mitch McConnell's political interest? What does he need to pass to help the Republican senators who are up in 2022? There are a big bunch of them.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't know. But no, I don't think he wants to compromise with Joe Biden for, because he's a nice guy or because for the good of the country. No, he's a political animal, and he's going to decide what's in the political interest of his Republicans.
Yeah. One thing that I've been thinking about and wondering about is just the idea of leadership too. I am curious what you think about like what responsibility these politicians have to just our country rather than their party.
Well, sure. And we're in a very interesting situation where we had one model of style of leadership, Donald Trump, which voters decided was too chaotic and exhausting and too many norms broken and too much bullying and cruelty, et cetera, and they rejected him. The big question is, was Trumpism rejected? Republicans don't really think so, but we're not really sure. But Joe Biden is already modeling a very different kind of leadership, really calm. Every day he gets out there, he's with the scientists on COVID, and he is going to, what the Biden people will tell you is that every day, Joe Biden is going to have a chance to show what empathetic, competent leadership looks like. And he's going to do that. And because his first job is to get the pandemic under control, which is the same thing as opening the economy, they're one and the same thing. They're not two separate things. Donald Trump kept on saying they were two separate things. There's the pandemic, which we should just not worry about. And then there's opening the economy, which we should do. You can't. Bill Gates, your own Bill Gates from Washington State, said you can't tell people go to a restaurant and ignore that pile of bodies in the corner. I mean, the economy isn't going to open until people feel safe and comfortable going about their business the way they did before the pandemic. So you've got to get the pandemic under control. And right now it's totally out of control, although the vaccine project is coming along pretty fast. But in terms of leadership, the other thing that we're going to have, which is new, is Joe Biden is widely, universally expected not to run for a second term. Now, he's not going to say that, but that's really interesting. What does it mean for a president who's not thinking about getting a second term? That frees him to do exactly what he thinks is right for the country. Now, of course, he wants to do things that are going to help his party. Barack Obama famously didn't do those things. One thing about Obama, as beloved as he is in the Democratic Party, no president has lost more seats, and I mean from like state legislature all the way, to governors and senators and Congress, than Barack Obama. He lost more seats in his 8 years than any other president had. I think more than 1,000 Democrats lost seats during those 8 years. So of course, Joe Biden is going to care about the Democratic Party. That's not really what I'm saying, but not thinking about what he has to do to be reelected, not worrying about a primary challenge from the left, that's a new dynamic, and we don't know what that will do. And that might produce a new kind of leadership. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some downsides to that. You're going to have what I would say is a premature nominating battle going on behind the scenes in the Democratic Party. And that's really too bad. Kamala Harris is not ready to be president right this minute. Most vice presidents get 8 years to kind of season themselves and learn on the job. And right away, you're going to have people jockeying for position because I don't think she's a field clearing candidate. I think that she might be the putative front runner, as vice presidents always are. But so that's a problem.
Why do you think she wouldn't be ready?
I think that right this very minute, I'm not saying she's not qualified. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that when you think about her run for president, okay, it was short-lived. It was extremely disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
She got out. Now it turns out she was a really good vice presidential candidate. She didn't really know what she stood for. Was she for Medicare for all or not? It kind of changed day to day. She was kind of wobbly on the issues. It was unclear what her core was. She was an extremely appealing person, but from that high point of 20,000 people turning out in Oakland for her announcement rally to kind of fading out, early on in the primaries, I just felt like she was not, she didn't go the distance. That's what I mean by not being ready. I'm not saying she's not qualified at all.
Yeah. Yes.
And what I'm saying is usually somebody like her gets 8 years to kind of develop into, the politician she would need to be. So that's why I'm saying she's not a field clearing candidate. I believe other Democrats will run for the nomination other than her.
Who do you think would run?
Half the field that ran this time, the ones that aren't 70 years old, not Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, but a lot of the rest of them, and then some who took a pass,
Mm-hmm.
But way too soon. Even I can't go there. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people are really still interested in kind of the media world of all of this and how I have a couple of questions just about how you've seen reporting change in recent years.
Well, reporting really changed in this election because we couldn't go out and talk to voters like we want to.
Yeah.
That was a big change. Yeah.
But I think really like kind of the difference in terms of, access to the president, the access that there was arguably more.
Well, we had a lot of access to Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
His psyche was very available. Whatever he was thinking or feeling, we were going to know about it, whether it was through Twitter or talking to us on the way to the helicopter. He was very, very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
That's so I would say that now Joe Biden ran a completely different campaign. He didn't stay in his basement as much as Trump said he did, but he followed the rules of the public health experts and he didn't have big rallies and he traveled as minimally. And now we're waiting to see if he will give more access to the press, which I think by definition he just has to.
Yeah. What about another viewer is wondering, wanted sort of your thoughts on how it's changed being a female reporter in Washington, kind of longer.
Well, it's funny. I have been at NPR for 35 years. I started when I was 10. And when I came there already were Cokie Roberts, may she rest in peace, wonderful Cokie Roberts, and Linda Wertheimer, and Susan Stamberg, and Nina Totenberg. So I was the second generation of women at NPR anyway. So I felt like they paved the way. I feel like, over my tenure, there's only been more and more and more women. I don't have any like war stories to tell you how hard it was to be a woman. I think those are the stories you would hear from Cokie and Linda and the generation before them.
Mm-hmm.
I think journalism is a great profession for women. What's really interesting is when Me Too happened, the responsive organizations were media organizations, kind of Hollywood. Those were the organizations that were, how can we say this? They could be shamed. I don't know if it's better for any woman on a factory floor today than it was 4 years ago. But, journalism, academia, entertainment, high tech, I think those are places where women have been. I'm not saying it's great for women everywhere, but at least they're listened to more.
We have at KUOW, the majority of our newsroom is
I
full of
find
women,
that
almost
easy to believe. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to see if I don't want to miss any good questions here. We have John is wondering if there's any possibility of Republicans in the Senate standing up to McConnell.
I don't think so. I mean, it would depend. I mean, yes, there have been Republican critics of Trump, very few of them. Most of them have had to leave, like Flake and Corker. You've got Mitt Romney and Ben Sass. Donald Trump, it's not that Donald Trump scares them. It's that Donald Trump has such a firm hold on the base of the Republican Party. That's what scares them. Mm-hmm. Ben Sass was very quiet during his primary. And after he won the primary and was coasting to victory in the very red state of Nebraska, then he started criticizing Donald Trump. Mitt Romney is kind of a different creature. He's, standard bearer, former nominee. His problem is with Trump, not with Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell has to take care of his members. I mean, he's going to do the things that he thinks will help them get reelected. So mm-hmm. if the questioner is saying there's going to be a bunch of Republicans that want to compromise and Mitch McConnell won't let them, we'll see what happens. There has been that dynamic in the Senate in the past. You always hear about gangs of 8, gang of this, you had the John McCains with a couple other people, but the center of politics in America has gotten so lonely. When I first started covering Congress and the White House, there was an overlap between the two parties. Both parties were coalitions. They were heterogeneous coalitions. The Democrats much more heterogeneous than the Republicans. And there was an overlap between conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. And that was the center of the political spectrum. And that's where deals got done and compromises got made. Over time, the center has just disappeared. And I don't think right now by their voting record, there's a single Democrat who is more conservative than a single Republican. In other words, Joe Manchin is still to the left of Republicans, which is really too bad. You want two parties that are coalitions. That's the most stable, the most productive kind of politics. And right now, we do have a Democratic coalition that's pretty broad. We have a Republican coalition that's very not broad, very homogeneous. Mostly white, non-college, rural. The suburbs went to the Democrats. Now, there is an argument in the party about how durable that is. Will the suburbs stay with the Democrats? They have now for 2 cycles. But that's what's missing. There is this thing called the Problem Solvers Caucus in the House with a group of Republicans and Democrats that wanted to, come together and make compromises. I'd have to look and see how many of them are still, how many of them were defeated this year, because of course, those are the people on the front lines. Right. But that's, it's funny. Voters want that. Voters want both parties to compromise, but they keep on sending people to Washington who don't want to do that.
Do the Republican voters still want that?
I don't know about that. Democrats definitely do.
Yeah.
Generally, polls showed that more Democrats than Republicans want their members to compromise. Mm-hmm. The Democrats are, because they're a broader coalition and they're a little bit closer to the center than Republicans are. But Republicans are better at taking the left of the Democratic Party and tarring the entire party with it. I mean, that was the defund the police, issue this time. Mm-hmm. Joe Biden wasn't for defunding the police. The vast majority of Democratic congressional candidates were not for defunding the police, but the Republicans made sure that every single Democrat, in their ads looked like they were for it.
Yeah. We haven't hit much on foreign policy, and I'm sort of curious for your take on both. I remember I was at Face the Nation when Trump was elected, and I remember talking with John Dickerson about whether, so many of the policies had been the same for so long. Same idea of carrots and sticks for North Korea. Same idea of on all kinds of fronts. Yeah. And we were like, maybe this it was when everyone was entertaining the idea that maybe this disruption would actually be incredibly
productive. Yes, that was the hope.
Yeah.
No, that didn't happen. No, that didn't happen. Now,
Mhm.
there is a bipartisan consensus that America has to be tougher on China, and that when America let China into the WTO, the idea was that China would become part of the international economic system. It would play by the rules. It would become a more middle-class country with economic and other kinds of social freedoms. It was probably a worthy experiment, but it failed. That's not what happened. So there is this sense that China, there has to be pushback to China, whether it's making a lot of our own health and medical equipment here, so we're not dependent on them, moving supply chains to other places in Asia. Of course, Trump wanted to bring all these supply chains back to America. That didn't work. That's not going to happen. You're not going to unravel globalization. But I can see Joe Biden, who has not said he would take the tariffs off of China, by the way, that Trump put on. He might or might not want to revive the idea of the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was the trade organization that excluded China, but included almost every other Asian country in the United States. I can see Biden doing that. There's no doubt that Donald Trump had a reflexive hatred, really, or distaste for multilateral organizations. He just didn't like them, whether they were the UN or NATO or the WHO. He didn't like them. But Joe Biden believes in allies, and to Donald Trump, allies were freeloaders who just, we protected them and they didn't pay up enough. That will change. That's going to be a huge change. And I also think there'll be a tougher line against Russia. That was something that Donald Trump, mysteriously, people have never really figured out why he was never able to criticize Putin or push back against him. Except for boasting all the time about no one's tougher on Russia than me. But then he never would be tough on Russia. So I think that there will be changes, but the world was already becoming a multipolar world before Donald Trump. There wasn't just one, Pax Americana. There wasn't just one superpower. I mean, China's going to be the biggest economy in the world pretty soon. So there's never any stasis. You can't just go back to the status quo ante, but there's no doubt that Joe Biden will be somebody who believes that America is more than just a rich superpower out for its own economic and security interests. He believes that America is an idea and that stands for values. And that's where he starts. And I think that's where he has much more in common with every other Western leader than Donald Trump did.
Another area you hit on, defunding of police and all the messaging there that may have hurt the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think for a lot of people who just the movement after the killing of George Floyd for racial equality and equity and just safety for Black people that there were a lot of high hopes that something might be done, even obviously at the local level, but at the federal level as well. Is there any chance, do you think, for
I don't think that takes big pieces of legislation. I think there's a lot a president can do on his own, and a lot of it has to be on the local level. I mean, these are about local police departments. Yes, I think that a lot can be done. You don't need a Democratic Senate to do a lot about racial justice. You just don't. I'm saying, maybe it would be better, but there's these ideas about, why not have a program where every police officer can get an associate degree, and that's part of reforming the police. I mean, there is so much you can do other than leading with your chin and say defund the police, which nobody understood what it meant. And even the people who said they wanted it said that isn't really what they meant. So that was just kind of I think that was the protests around George Floyd were incredibly powerful, and for a period of time they had majority support in the country. I think the violent rioting and then the fixation of the Republicans on defunding the police. I mean, I'm not, this is something that not all Democrats wanted, but enough of them wanted that the Republicans were able to make it into an issue. One of the other things about the whole racial justice area, I think Joe Biden will pay a lot of attention to this. He knows who got him to the White House, and he has said this over and over again. If it wasn't for Black voters in South Carolina, he wouldn't be there. His campaign was broke. He had no money, he had no field organization, and Jim Clyburn and black women in South Carolina heaved him over the finish line there. And then the rest of the Democratic electorate took a look at him and Bernie and Donald Trump. And even though they hadn't gotten a door knock from Joe Biden, he had no money for that. They hadn't seen an ad from Joe Biden, they picked him. So that was, he understands that. So I think things will happen on that front. I think he's less dependent on Mitch McConnell on that issue than he would be on other things.
Right, and he could maybe work with Senator Tim Scott in the
There's ways to go on that. There are a lot of things that he could do on that.
Yeah. I definitely think that's one area where a lot of Seattle area voters will be watching.
Yes.
We also haven't talked about Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and this was a bad election for her.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's no challenger to her right now. She says she's going to run again for leader. What was so interesting is she was going to step down if Hillary won. So, and we know that she's thought about her successor, and it might be Hakeem Jeffries. I think it will be a person of color for sure in the House. But they have a tough situation now. She has a tiny little majority. And that means Democrats absolutely have to stick together at a time when you're seeing a lot of divisions among them. The Republicans will stick together for sure in this situation because they are hungry and they see that they can get the House back in 2 years. So I think she feels that she's best equipped to do this. This was a huge blow to her because she is a great vote counter. She's very savvy. There are some Democrats who think if only she had compromised more and passed a relief package before Election Day, they could have had something more to go take home to their constituents. That's possible. I don't know if Mitch McConnell would have agreed to anything, that was more than just a tiny little bill. But she has been proven wrong. And let me just say something about the House races. Every Democrat and Republican operative thought the same thing. It's not like Republicans were saying all along, we're going to pick up seats. They were ready to lose seats. Yeah. If they had woken up the morning after Election Day and they had lost seats, the Republicans, they wouldn't have been surprised. So this was the opposite of what everyone was thinking was going to happen.
Interesting. John writes in and says, we haven't talked about gun control and regulation. Any sense of that, whether that's going to be a priority?
If Joe Biden can do that by executive order, I'm sure there are little things he can do around the edges. No, there's not going to be any gun legislation passed in a Republican Senate, if there's a Republican Senate, and a House that has this narrow majority. I think that's just something that, and this is something that I have heard that the Parkland kids, the March for Our Lives kids understand. Super disappointing. But when was Parkland? Does anybody remember that? How many years ago?
2017?
Yeah, I think so. 3 years. And it's like, Dick Durbin announced the DREAM Act 16 years ago. These things take a tremendously long time. And until you can break the logjam and have a durable majority for these things that, whether it's gun control, climate change, comprehensive immigration reform, they're not going to pass.
Yeah. It sounds like, let's see, Parkland was February. I'll get that to you in a second. But it sounds like it's time for everyone to be very pragmatic, perhaps, in their
Well, there's no one more pragmatic than Joe Biden.
Right.
It's so funny because here he had this incredibly progressive agenda. He's the head of a party that has moved to the left, not as far as the Republicans have moved to the right, but definitely moved to the left. He is a deal maker, a believer in the Senate, a compromiser, a half a loaf kind of guy. So he's probably the best president for this. Also, Democrats have no illusions about Mitch McConnell. When Obama and Biden came into office in 2008, they thought that they could make some deals with Republicans. They would start with Mitt Romney's healthcare plan. They would put all these tax cuts into the stimulus bill to get Republican votes. That's not going to happen anymore. They have no illusions about what they would get from Republicans.
Yeah. Parkland was February 14th, 2018. So
only 2 years.
Yeah. So interesting. So we have time for one more question. I just want to see if I've missed any of our folks here. I would say, okay, it looks like we've managed to get through almost all of them, I believe, that have come in. So I am just thinking here, President Biden is going to give his first State of the Union address. Or I guess it would be a state of it's different, their first year. It's not a State of the Union.
Right, it's not a State of the Union.
So, but he'll address the nation.
Yeah, and it'll be sometime in January.
Sometime in January. And let's say he starts it as many do with the State of the Union is X. What do you think Joe Biden would say?
By January, or maybe even a little after that, Joe Biden, if he has shown empathetic and competent leadership on the pandemic, the vaccine is starting to reach the very first frontline people who are going to get it, first responders, vulnerable populations, elderly, whatever. That's big psychological change right there. There's a lot of pent up demand in the economy. At some point, when enough people get vaccinated, I think you could have a little boom. I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Biden gets his approval ratings well into the 50s in his first year. Now, he's not going to be able to pass anything. The economy could still be sluggish. I understand all that. And incumbents, usually are blamed for everything, which is the way it is. And maybe he ends up losing the House in 2022. But I think that Joe Biden has a chance. The thing that he was selling, his brand, is what people wanted. They don't want this much division and chaos and enmity and hyperpolarization and partisanship. And his whole brand is about healing that. So most presidents that we elect are the antidote to the guy who just happened. In other words, you didn't like cerebral, no drama Obama. Well, boy, you really got the opposite thing when you voted for Donald Trump. He was drama and chaos all the time. Joe Biden, and he's a divider because that was his strategy. That's how he won. Joe Biden is the opposite. He's a uniter. So I think that's what he's going to tell, the country when he speaks to Congress. And I think that the Biden team is looking for ways he can demonstrate that every day, whether it's sitting down with people who didn't vote for him. Remember, that was one of his campaign promises. I'm going to be the president for people who didn't vote for me. Mm-hmm. I don't think you will ever see, I don't know what legislation will pass, but if it passes, you will never see a signing ceremony at the Biden White House where only Democrats are invited, because that was the case with every single signing ceremony, even for bipartisan bills. There weren't very many of them in the Trump White House. Democrats were not invited. So that won't happen. So I think there's going to be a big change in tone. And, we'll see how voters like that.
Well, Mara, it has been a real pleasure to be able to pick your brain on all of these topics for the past hour. Again, we so appreciate you taking the time when things are so busy, and we hear you on the air around the clock. So I don't know when you sleep. I don't know how much caffeine you're consuming, but we're very grateful to you for this time and for all the reporting you do every day.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yes.
And I look forward to coming to Seattle in person in the future. I love Seattle.
That would be great. We'd love to have you. So thank you all for joining us too.